We had the great good fortune and honor to work with Eric and the team at Sailthru to really benchmark this conversation around retention versus acquisition, where companies are in this journey, how they think about it, what their challenges are. And so we did some research to find out where they are. And perhaps you'll see your own activities and your own companies in the data that I'm going to present. So we'll walk through this in about 20 minutes or so, then we'll bring up the panel to add context and start thinking about some questions that you might want to ask either about the research or, more importantly, about our esteemed panelists who will join us in a few minutes. So this is me, Bruce Rogers. This is a picture of me in case somebody else got up here and started presenting to you. You would know that they were an imposter immediately. I'm the Chief Insights Officer at Forbes. I'm the head of the CMO practice. I write a column for Forbes. And the Insights business is a research organization that we started several years ago to help organizations really understand pain points, particularly around management decision-making for the C-level executives, particularly which Forbes has a great relationship with, and which is why organizations like Sailthru connect with us to do that. So we're going to talk about the research, the objectives and the methodology, our key findings. Retention reaps rewards. If you remember nothing else, remember that. That companies don't invest enough. We'll give you some of the data around that in retention. And even the most successful retail companies have a long way to go. I think this is, as I said, a journey, not a cage match, if you will. Retail and media companies face unique challenges, and believe me, I know, having spent most of my career in the media business, there's perhaps no more disrupted business on the planet or a challenging place to be. But certainly these concepts around retention, I think, are critical, especially for retail and media, where often margins are very thin. Taking advantage of retention requires investment in technology, and particularly around data, as we'll see. We'll talk about why it matters, and then we'll talk about some takeaways, some strategies that you can hopefully take away tomorrow and start thinking about how you can improve your own retention strategies. So this is the objectives, as I said, to determine how retail and media companies, very specifically, acquire and retain customers, measure the advantages of the different retention strategies, evaluate the impact retention has on company performance, first and foremost. Why do we do what we do, right? And compare and contrast companies that focus on retention versus acquisition. How many of you folks are from media companies in the room? Okay, all right, great. We have band of brothers here in the challenge of meeting profitability in a very challenging time. How many retail folks? Okay, several retail. This is the capital of media, so that makes sense. So we surveyed 300 people, particularly in the US and the UK, as you can see the breakout here, and by industry, nearly 1 in 5 of our respondents were in the media business, and a majority in the retail business to help understand where they are in there and self-assess in this journey towards retention versus acquisition. And we found some interesting things. And as Eric alluded to in the beginning, this whole idea of segmenting customer acquisition and retention strategies around gurus and grunts. Not to be a pejorative in and of itself, you do need grunts, as we know, you still need grunts to win a war. But if you want a strategy to excel, as the data will show, that those who are particularly focused on retention, and by gurus, by how we segmented this, the retention gurus, they spent more on retention than acquisition. They plan to spend more over the next 3 years. And they are exceeding their performance goals, their revenue goals overall for the company, right? The key KPI for the company. For acquisition grunts, they're overweighted towards, they're spending more money on acquisition than retention. And they are either meeting or exceeding their acquisition goals and plan to spend more on acquisition activities over the next 3 years. So sort of the mirror image of the retention gurus. And then the uncommitted, the sort of vast majority, is kind of falls neither here nor there. And they're really, I think, on this journey to find out where they need to commit. They haven't committed to acquisition. They're sort of not spending enough in acquisition, not spending enough in retention. And more importantly, they're not meeting either goals. So the majority of the sample here is kind of in limbo, right? Not a good place to be. Certainly the better place is to commit, as the data will show. So again, if we start to look at kind of the differences in segmentation and why we feel so positive about retention as a strategy, as the data shows and validates, that here nearly a 3x benefit in terms of increased market share. So who doesn't want market share increase, right? So a 3x increase in market share over the last 3 years for those who focus on retention, the retention gurus versus the acquisition grunts, and reducing customer churn. Again, anyone whose job it is to acquire and retain customers, churn is one of those KPIs that's front and center. And you can see a 12%, almost a 50% lift, if you will, in having less churn for the retention gurus. And perhaps surprisingly, it was kind of a surprise to me in the data, was even though they spend more money on retention, plan to spend more money on retention, they are actually meeting their acquisition goals, 88%. So it's not necessarily an either or, it's an and, but especially if you focus on retention. And this I think was one of those key findings in addition to the market share differential there. So if we look at where they're investing and how they're investing, one of the common themes was they're just not investing enough in terms of particularly around retention. So 4 out of 5 plan to increase their acquisition budgets over the have increased their acquisition budgets over the past year. Only 2 out of 5 had increased their retention budgets over the last 3 years. So sort of despite the data, despite sort of, if you will, in some ways, common sense. And we often have this conversation, and we talk to heads of marketing and heads of customer acquisition and retention services at organizations like Marks and Spencer and USA Today and Gannett and The Economist and others around how they're doing this, and you'll see this in the report, how they're dealing with this issue. So certainly there's a need that calls for increased spending against retention. And I think part of the issues, as the report shows, and as I think all of us have experienced, sometimes the inertia, the gravity around doing what you've always been doing is really hard to break, especially since any research that I've ever done since time immemorial says that customer acquisition is the #1 goal of any marketing organization. Am I right, Eric? That is the data that shows you, right? Because it's in some sense what you've always done, and it's a little easier to do what you've always done rather than think a little differently. So this is how confident they are, our respondents, in their ability to define the attributes of a valuable customer. This whole notion of, is it more valuable to keep gaining customers or to upsell and retain existing customers? Here we can see, there's a real challenge around this and a real opportunity for growth, I think. Even, our esteemed retention gurus are only 40% of them are saying that they're really confident in understanding this value proposition around their best customers at nearly twice the rate of the acquisition grunts. You see the differences between the retail companies and media companies. And as we were chatting before, having spent my life in media, is not comparable almost to any other business on the planet. It's sort of a quirky business, especially if anyone has a subscription rate base to meet, will know what I'm talking about. And then our fourth key finding here, that retail media companies, they face unique barriers, as we talked about, certainly just the inertia around doing something different. But in terms of the retail companies, in terms of media companies, like most of you in the room, they say the biggest barrier is cross-channel reader customer experience, a lack of enabling technologies, and I think at the core of this is, again, this notion of data, right? Do you have data that enables you to really understand and develop a better retention strategy? And then on the retail side, the top barriers that they told us were lack of consistent marketing efforts and communication. Over half of them said that. And 4 out of 10 said that there's no seamless omni-channel, cross-channel shopping experience, which is typically the biggest challenge for all retail organizations, especially having data sets that cross media channels, shopping channels, online digital experiences, and brick and mortar. And while people are making headway there, it's still a big challenge. Our fifth takeaway is to take advantage of, to be able to take advantage of retention requires investment in technology. We know intuitively, and we know from talking to folks that we talk to in the report, technology is the enabler to do that. You can't have access to data in real time that understands and helps you segment your customers without the technology to do that. And yet, even 37% of retention gurus cite technology limitations. So, this is the challenge, and yet the huge opportunity that we all face. So why does this matter? Why do we care about any of this? Certainly, we want to focus on retention that correlates, as we said, to greater increase in market share. Retention gurus still meet or exceed their acquisition goals. So again, by focusing on attention, you don't give up your acquisition goals, obligations. And companies focused on retention are more versatile in their customer strategies. And so some of the strategies for improving retention. Some of these kind of go without saying, but sometimes even the most conventional wisdom is a challenge to put in place in everyday life and how you go about your business. So make sure to measure the right customer metrics. If your metrics are skewed towards acquisition, obviously that's where your budgets will flow. Start with customer satisfaction and improve how you understand your company's value. How many people have a standard customer satisfaction data KPI that your organizations, senior executives, everybody sees all the time and lives and dies by? Show of hands, a few of you, okay. So something to consider there. And this is not just retail or media. This is almost every industry and every business where I have conversations about this. This is one of the key KPIs, either a net promoter score or some kind of customer satisfaction score, and having that data in near real time is critical. Start thinking about how you budget. And maybe you're under budgeted in retention versus acquisition. Focus on the data and technology to process the metrics that you need and the KPIs to help you understand where you are in this balancing your two activities between the acquisition and retention. Turn retention into a core company value, and I think this is often underestimated. The real change that needs to take place is often cultural and organizational. Technology itself can never be a solution. Really helping the company understand and having not just a CEO say, certainly a CEO say, this is the vision for the company and how we're going to move forward. That certainly helps, but it's never enough, right? It has to come bottom up and top down. And the only way to be the evangelist for that is to be armed, hopefully with data like this and sort of research that you can bring to your management to help make the case. And also, again, data, so it's not just your opinion, it's what the data shows. And as I also say, the data, sets you free from everyone's opinion, especially in marketing, where everyone is a marketing expert. When you have data to kind of stand firm on something, or just data that says, maybe this isn't a completely identified direction, so let's experiment. We need more data. Make the customer retention strategy part of your corporate culture and mission. Again, a cultural change first and foremost.